Radio Row in Las Vegas, Nevada. Super Bowl week, baby. 49ers and Chiefs rematch. Some of the biggest names in sports and entertainment will be right here. Presented by Roan Apparel. It's the Jake Asman Show.
Here we go, live from Radio Row in Las Vegas. And joining me right now is the former general manager of the Atlanta Falcons and now one of the leaders in football analytics, football analysis over at Sumer Sports, Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's at the end of the day. I still have some energy. I'm glad I'm able to get on here, talk some high energy football stuff.
I appreciate it because, I do a show that's tailored to the New York audience, and New York football fans right now, we're full of energy. We're also full of rage given what happened with the Jets and the Giants seasons this past year. So I guess I want to start from your perspective as a general manager. When you have a tough season and you get to the offseason, what is some of the first things that kind of go through your mind as you start preparing for the following season, where both Joe Douglas and Joe Schoen are right now?
Yeah, I mean, both of those guys, the biggest thing as a general manager, the first thing you do is you sit down with your coaching staff and your personnel staff, and you literally focus on where are we as a team? What are our needs truly? Not what the media is projecting or what the fan base is. Where are we? We know the finance. Where, we just need to figure that out. We need to get our evaluations. We need to decide on as a group, which is very important, right? This isn't just about a GM and his scouts making a decision or the coaches hammering it down. With both of those organizations, both of those GMs and head coaches work well together, which is really important. It's about really going in there and deciding, first of all, who are we not re-signing? Where are we going? And you start deciding right now, you start digging into free agency, right? And you start deciding on, are we going to focus in free agency here? Or are we going to focus in the draft here, right? It's understand the value is in the draft side. Most of the people in the NFL right now, they need help in free agency. And they all will say to me, like, Sumer Sports, the company you're in, I get it. We're good. We're okay on the draft side. Help us make the right decisions in FA because there are so many mistakes made there for many, many reasons. So in the end, it's about deciding where you go in draft or free agency and at what position, of course.
What if you need both? Like, I'll take a team like the Jets. They have a major, major need along their offensive line. You typically look at the free agents, and there's a reason why some of the best offensive linemen in free agency get there, because maybe there's an injury history, like a guy like Tyron Smith, or maybe there's some inconsistencies with their players. How do you weigh kind of spending big in free agency to fill a need on a win-now team with a 40-year-old quarterback coming off injury versus, hey, we got to build it through the draft when Joe Douglas doesn't necessarily have 2025 to kind of see it through. He's got to win next year.
Yeah, I mean, that hot seat situation, and we've all been there, man. I swear to God, I was on the hot seat every year in Atlanta, and I love Arthur Blank. But Arthur Blank's expectations were big. You need to win in 2 years. If you're not winning in 2 years and you start to flail. So, yeah, there's pressure that way. Some of the biggest mistakes, however, that are made in this league, and we'd all raise our hands as general managers, is by forcing need, right? So you have to understand your need, but you have to keep it in perspective. You don't just go out there and shoot at a guy that's kind of midline or adequate or maybe good, but you think we're going to pay him very good salaries because we need that. That's where the mistakes come. Joe Douglas is a fantastic football guy. He is one of the more respected guys in the league as far as evaluating talent. That's a big thing for him as we just stay with the Jets. I think this is, offensive line wise, yeah, that was tough, right? They've had a couple moves there that they would probably want back. I think it's really important to understand that there's a here and now element to it. If your quarterback comes back as you're assuming, I mean, yeah, you build around him. You have to make sure you protect him. Mekhi Becton, he's back, right?
Free agent.
Okay. Has had injury, right?
Correct.
And have they made comments yet about whether they're bringing him back or not?
Well, he's a free agent. They declined his fifth-year option before the year. The problem with him, he obviously had barely played the last 2 years. He actually played 16 of the 17 games this year, but he didn't play well. And I don't know how much of that is he's coming off the injury. He had an ankle sprain he played through, and his play kind of took a nosedive after that. I also, to be honest with you, I think the coaching up front is terrible. They don't pick up blitzes. They're unorganized. Maybe some of that is inexperience with the quarterback, but it was just a complete mess. And I know Rodgers makes a lot of that better, but he doesn't solve all that without better personnel up front.
No, he doesn't. And the fact that you guys, the Jets there, have had 3 O-line coaches in the last few years, like that's a big thing when you start talking about developing O-linemen, right? I mean, it's a big thing. It's funny. We just had Atlanta now. They're recognizing that that's a pretty darn good offensive line. And when I was there, man, I was taking darts every step of the way. So, yes, Joe and co definitely need to continue to build that O-line. And, in free agency, like you said, very key. There are reasons that those guys get out. However, one of my best free agent moves was Alex Mack. I look back and I never thought I would acquire in free agency. We paid a lot of money for him as a center, top-notch center. He helped us win a lot of games and was a big part of us getting to the Super Bowl. I think you fold in a free agent. I do think that. Now, I think they tried to do that with Lake and Tomlinson, right? I think
Correct.
and that unfortunately didn't work out. But I think you put in a central piece in free agency, and then you talk about bringing in the younger guys and developing. You have to have the right O-line coach. I tell anyone, you want to spend money on a position coach, I would take position money from the other position coaches and put it into your O-line coach. It's a vital position, that.
I mean, it's tough to hear that because you're right. Yet we have players on social media, Kai Becton, Breece Hall, Taylor Lewan, in an Instagram post thanking Mike Vrabel after he was let go with the Titans, went out of his way to say, love the coaching staff, except Keith Carter.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, Robert, I love it. By the way, let me tell you, I love Keith Carter. I'm just saying that position is vital. You got to make sure. And
where's the disconnect then with that? Where players are openly, clowning the guy on social media, and the head coach is like, "Oh, he's our guy," and they're sticking by him. Like, what's that fine line of listening to your players versus, hey, continuity with the same coach coming back?
Look, it's a really important part. It's a part of growth. Keith Carter is a hard-nosed, tough guy who works really, really hard. He's a good football coach. If, for instance, there's a reason why he comes in there after, I think it was John Benton, right? Isn't that the other O-line coach? He's coming in with a much harder approach. You're going to have these guys who are like, oh, this guy's a little bit too stiff and too whatever and too rigid. I think it's really important for your head coach to clean that up. I think it's important for the general manager and the owner to be right about, if they do believe that Keith is the guy, that they make sure that they endorse him properly with it, because very quickly they need to go to those O-linemen that are on social media or whoever it is, and they need to take care of that. If you don't, you are running the risk of always clowning on a guy, and that's unfortunate, right? But all I am saying in the end is that position, one of the best at that position was a guy named Dante Scarnecchia, who was with the Patriots forever. His son was actually there, Steve Scarnecchia, just left, came back to the Falcons. But what I'm saying there is you get that guy that you can ride for many, many years, man, that is the guy who's weight in gold in my mind.
I want to talk to you about drafting a quarterback, right? Joe Douglas, for a lot of his tenure is going to be defined by the Zach Wilson pick. Now, he tried to make, rectify the mistake, so to speak, by acquiring Rodgers. He goes down 4 plays in, so now it's basically do or die coming off that injury. But it felt like from the outside that the Jets stuck with Zach Wilson because he was the second pick of the draft. They didn't admit their mistake last offseason, get a better backup in case, worst case scenario, something happens with Aaron Rodgers. So someone who's been in that GM chair, who's made that decision to draft the quarterback, can a GM maybe be a victim of their own draft pick and wanted to hold on to that guy because you don't want to be wrong about a player you pick that high?
No, look, we're all mindful as general managers of having a sound retention rate, right? When no one wants to be the GM that is looked upon like, wow, every time he drafts, 3/4 of that draft he's moving on from. That's why some of the former, the head coaches that are out there, former head coaches who are all about older guys, they're the guys that GMs don't want to work with because all they want to do is say, I'm not going to develop this draft pick. Let's bring in more free agents. I mean, Joe Douglas, again, I do believe in this league. You are judged, fortunately or unfortunately, by your quarterback picks, by your coaching picks, and by the big moves. You're not judged by you hit on the 5th, 6th, and 7th rounders. Yeah, that's a good thing. You got to come to the table. But I will say in this league now, there are people out there, Howie Roseman, Les Snead, who have moved on from their first-round quarterback. To your point, sometimes you have to move on, and I think they're teed up. I mean, they bring in Aaron Rodgers. No one in their right mind would ever have projected what's going to happen there. And I think, look, the fact that they kept him another year, because I'm trying to think, he's going into his 4th season.
Correct. Yep.
4th season. And, do you keep a guy like that around that you think they could stay in the hopper and continue to develop? Your point is, should they just admit that it was a mistake? I thought personally, and I was pretty public about this, they needed to go forward with him being the coach or the quarterback after the injury, because who else is out there right now? And let's give him one final run at this to see if he has the ability. And you might ask me, I'm not throwing it back on you, but what is the public opinion of that? He doesn't. Is he more than a backup? And if he, Joe ultimately has to make that decision along with Robert, right?
I just think being in New York, the media scrutiny he's faced, the fans just always viewing him through the lens of he's the second pick in the draft, even though he went into the year as the backup. Right away, he became the starter again. So there was never that adjustment to, well, he wasn't supposed to be playing this year. And they just never made that move. I mean, eventually they went to Trevor Siemian, who went 2-1 down the stretch. Maybe if they made that move earlier, instead of 7-10, maybe they could have been 10-7 and snuck into the playoffs. it was a lost year, and now it feels like everyone's job is on the line going into this offseason leading to next season.
I understand it. And what I do want to say again, I mean, Joe Douglas knows his stuff. He knows what he's doing. No question about it. He's one of the most respected guys out there. And with that said, you got to really hone in on this quarterback situation, right? And you get Aaron back, and then things correct themselves.
Would you overpay for a backup if that's what it took, like quote unquote overpay? Hey, day one of free agency, Jacoby Brissett's out there. Let's make him the highest paid backup in the league, so we're covered in case something happens to Aaron.
No, and I'm coming from a situation. Arthur Blank used to knock on my door all the time. Where is our backup? Right? I mean, we had Matt Schaub and a couple other guys. I was spoiled because in 14 years with Matt Ryan, he missed 1.5 games. And he played obviously very well, so I was very fortunate with that. So my feeling about signing that high expensive backup, I'm not a big fan of it, quite honestly. I'd rather, I mean, they're picking at what this year?
Pick 10.
10. So to move up to get a young guy, I mean, it's a substantial move up to 4, 5, 6, right? And who knows who's going to get to 10, 12.
I think the problem with that is Joe Douglas going to be here in 2025 to see whatever quarterback he maybe took if he moved up in that scenario?
Well, I was talking to someone that was Chicago, and they're talking about Ryan Poles. Everyone wants the opportunity to pick their quarterback, right? And a lot of us don't get a chance to pick a second quarterback. And the same with coaching. We get a chance for 2 coaches. You don't usually get a chance for 3.
Well, you got a chance because you were successful.
I got a chance. Obviously we had Mike Smith, and then we moved on to Dan Quinn, who I think both of those guys I think are really good football coaches. I only had to pick one quarterback. And I look back on that, and again, I feel really fortunate that we had a guy that could win a lot of games. Unfortunately, we didn't get that Super Bowl at 16, which most people want to bring up here because of Kyle Shanahan. And I've talked, not to get away from the Jets, but I talked a lot about Kyle Shanahan here and about what I believe. I think he's a fantastic coach and very, very smart. The Atlanta people don't like hearing me say that because of what happened in 16, the Super Bowl. But I did say to him, like, this is such an important I didn't say to him, but I said to the people that I've talked to, this is such an important Super Bowl for him to show people that his 8-3 record, I think, in postseason includes the big game.
Right.
That's important.
We're talking, of course, former NFL GM Thomas Dimitroff. I want to get to Super Sports before we wrap up here, but I'm curious because you brought up Dan Quinn. Are you surprised what happened in Atlanta where Bill Belichick seemingly felt like he was going to be the guy to get the job? And you worked for Bill, obviously, during your beginning of your career in New England. What were your thoughts kind of watching that situation unfold? And then I'd love to get your take on how you think Dan Quinn will do as a head coach for the second time in Washington.
So on the Bill Belichick thing, it's unfathomable to me. I've said it. That's the word I use just because I can't imagine that he is out of a head coaching job. And I believe this. I believe if you look for a coach in this league, he's the surest bet to get you a Super Bowl in 3 to 4 years. The coaching that is available. And this doesn't come around all the time, right? You usually a coach like that is retiring in the organization. That he's available, it's to me, it's a once in a lifetime for
even with like the record the last couple of years.
If we had a lot more time, I would argue with it because as much as I appreciate everyone's thoughts on it, and you have to go through
I'm a Jets fan, so you understand where I'm coming from. I can't stand the Patriots.
I get it. But I get that 100%. But what I'm saying, I think there's a laziness to that narrative when you're just saying, okay, it was all Tom. It takes a great quarterback and a great head coach to do what they did, not one or the other, right? And again, we can go on and on about that. Look, the simple fact is I thought he was going to go to Atlanta. And in the end, that was a decision by the organization, by Arthur Blank ultimately, and his internal group. They weren't willing to take on a guy like Bill that was going to have full run of everything and kind of adjust everything.
What if he just coached? Like, I'm surprised he still wanted full run of everything. If he was just Bill Belichick, the coach, and he worked with the GM, wouldn't that be still a recipe for success?
But my feeling is a guy like that who is arguably the best ever. I call him the best ever, of course, along with Vince Lombardi and Paul Brown. You got to give him the run of the house. And he had even, I think, made it public that he was willing to work with Terry Fontenot, the GM there now, right? Rich McKay was a different story, right? They were pretty clear that Rich, you know who Rich McKay is, of course, that Rich was going to be focused on the CEO of AMBSE, Arthur's Sports and Entertainment. And they weren't going to have to deal with, something they probably, I don't know if they were loggerheads. One was head of competition committee. Bill was so over the years, I'm sure there was a lot of, banter and discussion about rules. In the end, look, my point is that you at one time, back to Dan Quinn, you had Bill Belichick, you had Mike Vrabel and Dan Quinn available. I was thinking, this is not going to happen because I was so impressed with the group that was out there. I think Dan Quinn's going to do a heck of a job up there. He's going to pair with Adam Peters as a first-time general manager. And Dan Quinn is the type of coach you want with a first-time general manager because he brings stoutness to his experience. He loves personnel, and he's also not the young guy, but he's a high-energy guy, and he's really good working side by side. He's not going to be the guy that wants to be a power monger. He is going to work with Adam, and I think it's going to be a really good marriage there.
Tell me about Sumer Sports. I've had Dr. Eric Allen, Eric Eager on the show. I think I was thinking of like Edgar Allan Poe there, combining on that Thomas.
Okay.
But hey, he's great as well, great writer as well. But tell me about Sumer Sports, because what you guys are doing is kind of, unheard of as far as what NFL front offices and coaches might be using going forward.
Yeah. So this is all about roster optimization. We are focused on providing NFL teams with data, a combination of subjective and objective data. Subjective scouting and objective. We've hired, we have over 400 years of experience. We've hired an internal scouting staff who are former GMs in the league that we're really excited about, as well as scouts. And we're providing these teams with extra data, extra line items of being able to look at who we've graded. We'll grade the entire NFL as well as draft class 800 in the draft class or whatever it is. And then what we'll do is we'll provide teams with that information, and then they can juxtapose with our Sumer ensemble grade, which is a grade that's filtered through a lot of different advanced analytics in those same areas. So you're able to look at grades that are subjective along with objective. And in our league, as a GM and as a team builder, you're always it's all about comparatives, right? It's about stack busting. I'll use that as well. We think we can be really a positive influence on stack busting. And what that is, if you have 5 linebackers and 5 corners on the draft board and free agency, Sumer Sports can be a really good tool to say, okay, we're struggling at trying to bust this group. Let's figure out how we can rank these with some of the data that's available, along with all of our subjective evaluation. So again, we are focused on that. We're not focused on game time decision making at this point. There are a lot of companies out there in this. We're one of the very few third parties that are providing roster optimization for the league.
Joe Douglas, please get in touch with this guy right here, Thomas Dimitroff, kind enough with his time on the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Quick break, and we're back. More coverage from Radio Row. Stay tuned and like and subscribe on the channel.